In the darkness of the caves of Belize, even the river supports very little life. But as it continues on its path towards the ocean, this water, which fell first on some of the most infertile terrain in the tropics, is about to enter some of the richest. As the water reaches sunlight and warmth, the profusion of growth begins, and on the borders of darkness and light, some unusual patterns of life have emerged. Close to the cave entrance, but away from the wind, fungus fly larvae spin a curtain of fine threads. Each one is lowered slowly, a sticky globule at the end designed to trap flying insects. The larva is attracted by vibrations when an insect is caught. Once attached, like this fruit fly, the victim is unlikely to escape and is slowly hauled up by the larva to be eaten alive. As the rivers emerge from the limestone caves, water and light, dense vegetation and constant warmth combine to produce tropical rainforest, where life is as abundant and diverse as anywhere on Earth. This is limestone country, and in sharp contrast to the granite and quartz of the barren mountains above, there is food and growth in plenty. As in the mountains, vegetation is richest along the river banks. But here, it's not simply the presence of water that promotes growth, but the combination of water and light, where the river holds the forest at bay. The largest mammal in Central America, the tapir. It's a relative of the horse and the rhinoceros. The unusually extended upper lip plays an important part in feeding. It has an extraordinary capacity to select and pluck the best growth in places which the tongue and teeth cannot reach, and without falling foul of the thorns. Along the river banks, bri trees in season are important providers. The seed pods may be as much as 22 centimeters in length, not much less than the painted turtle which feeds on them. By contrast with the mountain streams, the water in the valley rivers is rich in nutrients and full of life. It has collected minerals from the earth and vegetation from the surrounding forests and supports a wide variety of fish. The river also draws the land animals. In the rainforest, the largest of the carnivores is the jaguar. The jaguar must kill to eat, but is highly selective in its choice of prey. To be wounded here in these humid conditions could well prove fatal, and so this female will take easy prey if she can. But the protective shell of a mature turtle proves too much for her. In the air, the dominant scavenger is the king vulture. It can fly very high and so is able to feed both on the mountains and in the valleys. But to find food through the dense covering of rainforest, it has developed an acute sense of smell. The combined span and width of its wings make it absolute master of the air. After 4 months, the rains return. The wet season extends through 8 months of the year, from May to January. But the heaviest falls are always at the beginning, with dramatic effect on the landscape and the vegetation. More than 75 centimeters of rain may fall in 3 days, and the floodwaters carry rich sediment down towards the sea. On the river banks, where the light penetrates most, heliconia plants grow in abundance, and they have an interesting and complex relationship with the hummingbirds. The flowers appear inside these brightly coloured bracts, and each flower lasts for only 2 or 3 days. The rufous-tailed hummingbird, brilliantly coloured and fiercely territorial, is so small that it can actually perch on the bracts themselves. It comes in search of nectar at the base of each flower and plays a critical role in the pollination process. At the same time, flower mites use the bird as a carrier to enable them to move on as each flower dies. The mites are transported in the bird's nasal passages and move with astonishing speed in response to the scent of a flower. The mites live inside the base of the flower and measure only about 0.5 millimeter in length. They feed on nectar and pollen among the stamens until the flower begins to wither and die. Another hummingbird, the long-tailed hermit. It's much larger than the rufous tail, but by contrast makes no territorial claims. Instead, it covers considerable distances in its search for food along the river banks. This has benefits both for the plants by extending the range of pollination and for the mites, which are dependent on the birds for transportation. But it spells only trouble for the territorial rufous tail, which will drive off anything it can that might be a threat. This includes the owl butterfly, which is just about as big as the bird. But despite the hummingbirds, owl butterflies have a crucial relationship with the heliconia. The butterflies roost during the day. Courtship and mating take place in the evening, and the eggs are always laid on the underside of heliconia leaves. This pair is mating. They also do all their feeding in the early morning and evening. The heliconia leaves first provide shelter for the owl butterfly eggs and later food for the emerging caterpillars. Once laid, the eggs are left alone and the caterpillars will have to fend for themselves. A very rare member of the spotted cat family. This is a young margay. Nocturnal hunters, margays live largely on birds, lizards and frogs and spend most of their time in the trees. This cub is about 8 weeks old and still totally reliant on its mother for food as well as for protection. But in 4 months from now, it will be hunting for itself and entirely independent. Meanwhile, it still has a lot to learn. The pods of the bri-bri tree also attract nocturnal feeders. This is the tree porcupine. It's entirely herbivorous, but with a strong preference for this fruit, especially when slightly unripe. The tree porcupine is a rodent and very slow-moving, relying on its quills for protection. Where food is plentiful and the living is easy, life proceeds at a leisurely pace. As the floods recede after the first heavy rains, leaving isolated pools in the forest, frogs collect in large numbers in search of mates. Many of the species are adapted to living in trees, with expanded toes and suction pads for climbing. The caterpillars of the owl butterfly generally hatch together. They bite their way out of the eggs and then feed on the eggshells themselves. This first meal provides them with essential nutrients. Here, a batch is hatching normally, but there are many dangers for these creatures, even at the embryonic stage. These eggs have been attacked by parasitic wasps, which have pierced the shells and laid their own eggs to feed on the butterfly embryos. As many as 30 of these minute parasites may emerge from a single butterfly egg. The adult wasps are so small that they're able to cling to the butterfly's wings and then attack the eggs as they're being laid. The frogs that have found mates now prepare to lay and fertilize their eggs. The females carry the males on their backs throughout the mating. But before laying, the female must absorb sufficient water to produce the egg mass. This is also the time at which they are most vulnerable to predators. The four-eyed opossum, so named because of the markings above its eyes. It's attracted to the pools by the mating calls of the frogs. It's an omnivorous marsupial, and being a good climber and swimmer, a dangerous predator for frogs. Having eaten, it is meticulous about cleaning itself. But it must take care because it is itself potential prey. Left alone, the young margay is still learning. The owl butterfly caterpillars feed incessantly and go through several stages of enlargement in the process, renewing their skins at each one. At this, their final stage as caterpillars, they may be as much as 11 centimeters in length. As soon as the female frog is able to produce her eggs, she fixes the sticky egg mass to a leaf, where it's immediately fertilized by the male. Both these species of tree frog employ this technique and may repeat the process several times in a night. The eggs are always laid above a pool so that hatching tadpoles can drop directly into the water. As the owl butterfly caterpillar reaches the end of its growth, it painstakingly spins an adhesive pad of silk to which it will attach itself for the period of pupation. While suspended above the water during incubation, the frog's eggs are relatively safe from attack, but they are still vulnerable to specialist predators. This is the cat-eyed snake. When and if they do mature, the tadpoles must enter the water immediately. These tadpoles are jumping directly from the leaf. Finally, the owl butterfly caterpillar begins to shed its skin and become a pupa. Metamorphosis will take about 10 days before the adult butterfly emerges, and always at dawn. In the temporary forest pools, the absence of fish makes the tadpoles relatively safe from attack. But they are at risk from other predators, and one of the most dangerous is the giant water bug. It hunts by waiting motionless for prey to swim within its grasp. Once the prey is caught, the bug injects its victim with a potent fluid that first causes paralysis and then dissolves the interior tissues. The bug breathes through a pair of tubes at its tail which extend above the surface. Having extracted the contents, what's left of the tadpole is discarded and the bug waits again. As the dry season progresses, many of the pools disappear completely, and the Mexican burrowing toad digs itself into the drying mud. It burrows backwards, turning its body as it does so and entering the mud in a spiral. It will remain buried for a month or more until the rains come again. In the dry season, even quite large rivers may be reduced in time to trickling streams, exposing white sandy banks. One of the rarest of the spotted cats and the most hunted, the ocelot. The ocelot is not accustomed to hunting fish, but as the rivers and pools dry out, trapped fish become easy prey to unusual predators. But for the ocelot, even trapped fish can be elusive. The dry season has advantages for some fish. The blue-eyed cichlids wait until the river waters are at their quietest before laying their eggs. The mating pair select a protected site, usually below a rock, and they may spend several days cleaning and preparing it, transporting sand and debris in their mouths. Having completed their preparations, both then defend the site vigorously. When the female is ready, she turns upside down and lays her eggs in rows on the underside of the rock. The male, after standing guard, follows in her path and fertilizes each row in turn. The dry season also produces the most extravagant display of flowers, particularly along the riverbanks, with their abundant supply of nectar on which many of the birds and insects depend. The long-tailed hermit has an exceptionally long and curved bill to reach nectar at the base of the canna lily. Even so, the bird is drawn deep into the flower, which in turn is dependent on this activity for pollination. But there are other, more destructive relationships. The bill of the little hermit is too short to feed in the same way, and so it pierces the petals at the base and takes the nectar without coming into contact with the pollen-bearing stamens. This means that it feeds without contributing anything to the flower. It will even do this with unopened flowers. This does, however, provide unexpected access to the nectar for many insects. The long-tailed hermit is then harassed by the insects. The little hermit carefully surveys the surroundings before taking a dip. Now that they're protecting their eggs, the blue-eyed cichlids have acquired conspicuous vertical stripes. They fan their eggs for several days after fertilization to keep them clean and supplied with fresh oxygenated water. At this stage, the young are still dependent on the yolk sacs for nourishment. They do not become free-swimming until the contents have been fully absorbed. To find a clean environment and avoid the growth of algae, the parents have prepared a new site to which to transfer the young as soon as they hatch. They do this by collecting the fry in their mouths. The vertical stripes serve both as identification for the young and as a warning to potential predators that the young are being defended. Towards the end of the dry season, the tapir spends much of her time in the water. She feeds by uprooting weeds and other vegetation, and in the process stirs up food for the fish. After 4 months, the rains return again and replenish the rivers. The cichlid fry are now about 5 weeks old, and with the fresh water and plentiful food, they leave their parents and disperse to fend for themselves. But few of them will survive to adulthood. These tropical waters have produced some uniquely adapted nocturnal hunters. The yarpok is the most unusual of the New World opossums. It's the only one adapted to a semi-aquatic existence. It has particularly long and agile fingers on its front paws with which it finds and seizes its prey. Night also brings out the fishing bats, which emerge from their roosts in hollow trees along the river banks. They feed almost exclusively on fish. They have evolved specialist fishing techniques and have developed extremely sharp teeth and specially adapted claws for trawling along the surface of the water. They detect their prey by emitting high-pitched squeaks. They then listen to the echoes to locate ripples on the surface of the water that indicate the whereabouts of fish. Having caught a fish with one foot, the bat hangs inverted from the other and rapidly transfers the catch to its mouth. The teeth and jaws have an extraordinary capacity to support fish as much as 2/3 of the bat's own weight, while chewing at the same time. It does use its front limbs occasionally, but is quite able to feed without them, even hanging by one leg. As day returns, mists from the forests are burnt away by the sun and moisture re-enters the atmosphere. This is the heart of the water cycle. As they leave the mountains and valleys, the rivers begin to change. And as the rivers change, so does the plant and animal life. The water is about to enter the final stage of its journey towards the ocean.